So basically, half of the city of Langsberg and city of Ovid are gone this weekend because there's nothing to do out here on the 4th of July. And so that's reflected also in the parishes. Both parishes are lower than normal this morning because who comes to Ovid and Langsberg for the holidays? Nobody. Um, so, anyways, though, it's a big celebration this week. Obviously, we remember the 250th anniversary of the formal Declaration of Independence, our country declaring its freedom from Great Britain, happened 250 years ago yesterday. And at the same time, there's also a lot going on in the church during the last week, and they just can't catch a break, it seems like. But we're going to address what's going on in the church right now and the media reports on it because, again, I've been reading articles about it for the last couple of days, and I it pains me so much to read articles about liturgy, about the church and the media because there's so much intentional disinformation, so much absolute lack of understanding. It bothers me every time. It's like when I see religious ceremonies in the movies. I'm like, that's not how you do it. I can't handle it. It's like, oh. But anyways, so as we know, formally excommunicated and declared in schism as of July 2nd is the Society of St. Pius X, called the SSPX, right? That's the initials, the Society of St. Pius X. And if you read the reports, they would make you think that it's because they love the traditional Mass and sacraments. That's not why they're excommunicated. That's the main thing to contend with. They weren't excommunicated because they love the old Mass. When I came back to the Diocese of Lansing, I was one of only a few priests in the entire diocese that was saying the old Mass, so I know it all very well. I've done the sacraments in the old rite as well. All these things are very familiar to me. I like it very much also. But that's not why they're being excommunicated, or have been rather. It goes much deeper than that. So, we all know what happens in the 1960s in society and in the church. Chaos, absolute chaos, especially late 1960s after the Second Vatican Council. Now, asterisk for your historical knowledge, the Second Vatican Council did not actually change anything in the Mass or the sacraments. That all happens after the fact. Good, bad, or ugly, it is what it is. But that happens after the fact. And, it's bad in the United States, but in Western Europe in particular, it's an absolute clown show, it seems like. Um, Catechesis, celebration of sacraments, it's a big laboratory. And you look at Western Europe today and you wonder why it's the absolute hole in the ground it has become, culturally and morally speaking. It's because it traces back to that moment in particular. This is when it goes off the precipice. When the church goes, the world comes running after it and said, you finally joined us. So you have this happening in Western Europe, and it's just chaos, mass chaos. And again, you see the reflection of that now in the absolute lack of any sort of faith in the majority of Western Europe. And so Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, who is from that part of the world, decides to found a priestly fraternity to help combat the lack of faith and restore order in terms of theology and sacramental practice. Noble, good. And he does that in 1970. The Archbishop is part of the Second Vatican Council too, keep that in mind. And so he founds that order, the Society of St. Pius X. And there's no major problems at the beginning. They're doing their thing. They're trying to recatechize part of Western Europe. They're celebrating the old sacraments, the old Mass, so to speak, the old rite. And the Vatican does not bother with anything. They're doing fine. They haven't done anything wrong so far. And so they just kind of let them do their thing. Everything comes to a head in 1988. So 18 years after that's foundation. When the Archbishop is getting old and he's afraid the order will die if there's not a bishop to carry it on. Now, again, keep in mind, religious orders in general do not need to have a bishop of their own. A bishop always belongs to a diocese. That's the thing. And I know this from personal experience. I was in religious life. I was part of a religious order. We had a bishop from our order who was not obligated to obey the rules of the order because now he's the bishop of such and such diocese. Still connected to us, but no longer in the same level, so to speak. And so the Archbishop goes to the Pope, who at that time was Pope John Paul II. Pretty decent feller, good guy. After all, he becomes a saint, so that tells you something. And the Pope agrees. We'll consecrate some bishops. Give me some names. Because the Pope has to make the decision at the end of the day. The Pope has to make a formal mandate, a formal decree saying we have chosen so and so and so to join the group of the successors of the apostles. That's what it boils down to. The Pope, being the successor of St. Peter, the vicar of Christ, the leader of the church, he's the one who can say they can be a part of this apostolic succession or not. Okay, that's important to understand. It's part of the role. And the Archbishop agrees at first. The next day he turns around and decides, no, I'm going to appoint who I want. So he goes ahead and consecrates bishops on his own because he does not want to have to give us options of selection to the Pope. And that's when the first excommunication of the order takes place in 1988. Because they went ahead and did episcopal ordinations without papal approval. Canon Law 101. First year canon law student would understand the problem with that. It says very clearly in canon law, you have to have a papal mandate, number one, first condition. Number two, a bishop has to be assigned to a diocese. And they had neither of those. So that's why the excommunications happened in the first place. And so fast forward to 2009, you have Pope Benedict XVI. Great guy. Great theologian. Loved the liturgy. Made it a lot easier to say the old Latin Mass and things like that, which is great and wonderful. He lifts the excommunications in the hope that the order will return to the church. And they begin talking. And talking. And talking. From 2009 until July 1st, they would not agree to what the church asked of them. They were still part of the church at that time. The excommunications were lifted. The church is saying, no, we want to bring you fully into the fold here. You have a good charism, a good mission. You're doing good work. We want you to be a part of the church. 2009 to 2026 now, supposedly. So beginning of July, more or less, is when it hits the news that they've decided they want to consecrate more bishops because their last two bishops are getting old. Which again, you can't have a bishop reserved just to work in a religious order. It doesn't work like that. It never has. But they've decided they need to consecrate more to continue their order. And so the Pope, as the Pope, sends them a letter. Says, do not do this. This is not the time for this. Put it off. The Pope never said that it would never happen. That's a key thing to remember. He never said it was not a possibility. It was not on the table. He told them simply to wait until they get some more things worked out. That's what the Pope asked. And we saw how they regarded that. On July 1st, they went ahead and did what they wanted to do. And now they're formally excommunicated again, along with everybody who formally holds to what they've done. And now they're declared formally in schism. So excommunication, in a nutshell, let's say this is the church. This is me, let's say. I'm here in the church, and I do something very bad. And the church says, well, now, because of what you've done, you're over here. You're outside of the church now. You've made a decision to place yourself outside of the church. That's what excommunication is. It's someone does something of their own free will that ends up pushing them outside of Christ's church. Schism is when you not only are okay with that, but you begin leading other people in that same direction. So let's say next weekend you come out here, and it's not going to say Holy Family Catholic Church of the Diocese of Lansing. It's going to say Holy Family Catholic Church, and in very small letters, of the Diocese of Father Anthony Brooks is choosing. And you all still keep coming, even though you know what it says. That's schism. I'm leading you away, and you still keep coming. That's schism. Now, it's intentional. So this is the result of what they've done. But there's a few major problems here. Number one, obedience is necessary to any form of functioning society or civilization. Obedience is a core part of that. Even more so when it comes to the spiritual realm, because we believe in a moral hierarchy, a moral order, a spiritual order. So obedience is an absolute necessity in that regard. Again, to put it into context, I can't just go wherever and do whatever I want in any church. The bishop could call me this afternoon and said, you know what? You're a moron. You can't say Mass anymore. And I can't say Mass anymore here. The reasoning for that is because, well, maybe I am kind of dumb. Yeah, I agree. But Uh, okay, you don't have to say yes. I know that's okay. But anyways, what happens is the sacraments are not mine. The church is not mine. I received the sacrament from the church, holy orders. And because the church said you can have this sacrament, the church also said you can celebrate these sacraments. The bishop is the successor. The apostles who said to me I could celebrate those sacraments. The bishop could just as easily say, no, you cannot. He's the one responsible for that, put in that place by the Pope. The bishop of the Diocese of Lansing was chosen by the Pope to do exactly that. And I've been around a little bit, okay? I was in the Archdiocese of Chicago for a number of years. I spent time in the Archdiocese of Detroit. I spent time in the Diocese of St. Louis. I spent time in the Milwaukee Diocese. I've been around a little bit. Anytime I go to any other diocese and I'm going to say Mass publicly in any of their churches, first I have to call my bishop, say, hey, can you send a letter to this diocese because I'm going to go there saying I'm a priest in good standing? I mean, I haven't done anything really bad and I'm not kicked out yet. That's what it means. That I'm validly ordained, all this kind of good stuff. Send it to their diocese. So the diocese, my diocese sends a letter to their diocese. Their diocese sends a letter back to my diocese. Then it gets to me and says, you have permission to celebrate Mass in our diocese. And this church on this and this day. It has to be very clear permission. Because again, I'm not the owner of the sacraments. The bishop is in charge of his territory, put there by the Pope. So obedience is very important. Again, at every ordination, you promise obedience to the lawful successor of your bishop. Nobody twisted my arm. Nobody was back there with a gun like, hey, you better promise this. No, they told you beforehand. This is what you are agreeing to. This is what you're going to do. Assent of the will, assent of the faith. Obedience. And you make that promise. Publicly, it has to be done too. It cannot be done in secret. And so although it's hard sometimes, and I don't always want to do what they want me to do, generally speaking, I try my best. But to put it into a little nutshell, again, obedience. Not always fun. The Saints and Scholars campaign. When they brought that up, I said, no, I want nothing to do with this. I don't like the idea. I don't like the way it's going. Not a fan. There's better ways to do this. They took my feedback. A few months later, I got a letter from the diocese saying, we're going to do the Saints and Scholars campaign. This is how much you're responsible for. And I had to. It didn't matter whether or not I thought it was a good idea. It doesn't matter. It's not my job to decide those things. It's not my task. The bishop made the decision. I have to obey what the bishop says. And that's how that went. That's why we did it. Because if it had been my way, we would have done it all. But it wasn't my way. As painful as it was for all of us, we still went through it. But even in little things like that, but in something much greater like the spiritual realm, the sacraments, the order of the church, how much greater is the necessity for obedience, not just on my part, but on all of our part. By saying we're Catholic, we agree to be obedient to the faith and to the church. That's what part of the deal is. And so you go back to the Society of St. Pius X. Now, at every episcopal ordination, meaning the ordination of a bishop, at the very beginning, and as part of the actual rite, the ceremony, is you begin with reading the papal mandate, a letter from the Pope stating, I have chosen so-and-so, John Henry, James Smith, whatever, to be added to the group of the successor of the apostles and appointed as bishops or auxiliary bishops of such and such diocese. You read that at the beginning of the ceremony. They read something at the beginning of their ceremony. It was not a papal mandate. It was a letter they themselves composed explaining why they're doing what they're doing. During the ceremony, this is another interesting thing. During the ordination of a bishop, the bishop promises to be obedient to the Pope. They did that while being disobedient, promising to be obedient. How does that work? It doesn't. So this is what we have going on here. And so what happens is they knew what would happen. This is the problem. Pope Leo warned them multiple times, do not do this. Wait, put it off. They knew exactly what was on the table. This is what it boils down to. They weren't excommunicated because they love tradition. They weren't excommunicated because they preferred to do sacraments in Latin. None of that was the case. is because they went ahead and of their own free will did something that they knew they were not supposed to do, which is consecrate bishops. That's why. And not only that, they also said what they were doing was good and right. And so that's where our problem is. So, the media with all these, Pope excommunicates ultra-traditionalist religious sect because they like Latin and like the old Mass. I literally read articles that said that. I'm like, yeah, you guys are dumb. No. That had nothing to do with it. Absolutely nothing. It was because they consecrated bishops without papal approval. And that is a serious thing when it boils down to it. Saying I can make myself a successor of the apostles? Answer that one before God. That I've chosen without Peter's approval to say I'm an apostle, the successor of the apostles. That's where our problem is. And so this is why the excommunications happen. This is why the schism happened. And it's a sad day for the church, obviously, because again, to see so many people who could do so much good if they wanted to willfully take another road. But it ties into something the devil's been doing since the beginning of time. Adam and Eve, we all remember them, right? Remember their first sin? Everybody thinks the first sin Adam and Eve committed was eating the apple. The first sin Adam and Eve committed was pride. Before they took the apple, they decided they knew better than God. That was the trick the devil used on them. God doesn't want you to know. He's not being nice to you. You can have this knowledge. You can have this power. You can have this. You can be like God. Just take it. And that's when they took it and ate it. After in pride, they decided that they know better than anybody else. In the gospel, what does Christ say? Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart. Humility is the opposite of pride. So you tell me which one comes from God. We know how Adam and Eve ended. In the Garden of Gethsemane, again, keep in mind, St. Luke tells us, and Luke's a physician, remember, that Christ is under such stress and moral agony and mental anguish that he begins to sweat literal blood. That his human body is in such revolt and disgust that he's literally sweating blood because he's seeing all the evil and all the sins from the beginning to the end of time. And in his humanity, he turns to his Father and says, Father, if it's possible, take this cup away from me. But then in humility, what does he add? But not my will, but thy will be done. Humility is always going to get us farther than pride. It's a harder cross to carry, absolutely. But which one makes me more Christ-like? Doing what I want to do? Or doing what the good Lord asks me through his church, which has its problems. Absolutely. There's problems in the church. The Pope also makes mistakes on occasion. We've lived through some doozies over the last years. Things set off the cuff. The Pope's not infallible all the time. That's another thing to understand. The Pope is infallible when he speaks on matters of faith or morals, as the successor of St. Peter. But in his own capacity, he makes mistakes, like everybody else. But can you imagine the responsibility that he carries on his shoulders every single day? There was a Pope not too long ago, when speaking of what it was like being Pope, and I think every priest dreams of being one once in a while, but I've given that up. I know it's not going to happen. I'll be lucky if I ever become even, well, no, I'm not becoming anything. So I've reached about the top of my ladder here. But there was a Pope who said that every night when he laid down to go to sleep, it was like laying his head on a crown of thorns again. Because that's what it was like, being Pope. Every single day, putting on a crown of thorns. And so that's exactly what's happening now. This is why, again, 2 and 2, put them together here. Let's do that. If they knew what they were doing was right, why did they first make sure the media is involved? Why did they send this letter out to all these different organizations first? Why does every news company under the sun know? Because they were trying to get opinions on their side first. The Pope made a mistake again. No, the Pope is very clear. Canon law. That's all he's doing is saying it's right there. You know what you're doing. You shouldn't do it. And they did it anyways. As the scriptures say, Pride goes before the fall. And so let us pray, obviously, for the church, because this hurts the church more than anything else. More division is never a good thing. We have enough of that already. The last thing we need is more. Pray for the members of the Society of St. Pius X. It's a very precarious and dangerous situation to willfully place oneself outside of the Catholic Church. Do you know what that means in the long run to be excommunicated? It means that if they were to call me for last rites, I would have to say no. I would have to say no. That's what that means. That's how serious it is. And to pray for the Pope. It's not an easy task. It's one I don't think anybody in their right mind wants. But it's one God has called them to in this time, and Lord knows He needs our prayers and our support. So again, humility, humility, humility. Look at Christ. He's meek and humble of heart, and He is our ultimate model.